All right, we are live with Detox. I think we are getting people in still. Let me just look at all the people who are coming in, who all have joined in. I think Preetham Saha. Hey, Preetham, where are you from? Let's talk to the people who have joined in. Excited. Yes, we are excited as well. So welcome back to Detox. We have been hosting events since pre-pandemic times. A lot has changed over time since then. This is the first time we are doing this live event for designers across the world. And we've got Shubham here. We've got Preetham from Mumbai. And a lot of people are still joining in, I think. Sardashish has just joined in. Hey, Sardashish. Hey, Siddhant. How are you doing? Dheeraj has joined in. Hey, Dheeraj. I think people are still pouring in, I think. Where are you from? People are joining from Mumbai. People are joining from Bangalore. All right. Great. So welcome everyone to this session of Detox. Detox is nothing but designers talk UX, and we have a very special session today. We have Shreyan joining in live with us from Healthify Me. He has been working over there since a while now, and we are going to talk about responsive design. We have a lot of Sameer joining in. Hey, Sameer from Mumbai. Great. Hey, Shweta. Shweta joining from Bangalore. Hey, Adesh. Welcome to Detox. All right. So we have been doing Detox since I think 2019, and this is the first live event that we are hosting since then. It's been a lot has changed over time. A lot has changed because of the pandemic, and we were not able to host an event since 2019. We were having a lot of meetups since then, and a lot of fun, a lot of conversations that we've had. We've had about 12 events that we've hosted since 2019, and then we had to stop in between. However, we are back, and we have new mentors coming in and new guests coming in who are gonna help you with tips on UX design, conversation, experiences. They're going to share their experiences and expertise with you in terms of UX design, different aspects of it. So without any ado, I would like to talk a little about what is Detox and what is designers, and how are we helping designers grow and upskill themselves, right? So Detox is a community, Detox is a publication, Detox is a conversation, Detox are meetups offline as well as online. So we're going to have these series of events of Detox wherein we are going to talk about how people work in the industry. We're going to share some tips, and we're going to take some queries in the end of it. Okay, so we are gonna have some conversations around responsive design. So I think a lot of people have been working in the industry. A lot of few people are new to UI UX design. So we were talking about designers. Designers, essentially, we are a platform. We are hosting sessions, and we are having a bunch of courses that we have introduced in terms of designing from UI UX design from scratch. And we've introduced designing for VR interfaces, designing for AR interfaces, as well as designing for voice interfaces, right? So we do a lot of programs wherein we bring in mentors from across the industry, and they help people like you upskill themselves, or people who want to switch to UX design from any other stream. They are mentored, and they are provided with the resources wherein they can jumpstart their career in UX design. All right. So with Detox, what we want to bring in, we want to bring those mentors, we want to bring those people for you on this platform where you can have conversations with them. You can have if you have any questions, you can ask those questions with these mentors, and they will share their experiences, how they have been working in the industry since long, and how they have been working, what are difficulties they have been facing. They have gone through the same path, so how they have improved over time and how they learn in their everyday lives, right? So I would like to bring in Shreyan with me. Hey, Shreyan. Hey, welcome to Detox. How have you been doing?
You there?
Yeah, I
Hey,
can hear you.
I
Yeah,
think I think I think you can hear me now. Hey,
yeah.
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great as well. So, I hope everything is fine. In these pandemic times, everything has changed, right? So,
Yes, it's going good. Just stuck at home, working from home. Yeah, that's been the jam recently. Yeah.
yeah. Let's just hope everything gets back to normal.
Uh,
And
yeah, yeah.
life gets back to normal as the old times were, right? So
Yes.
great. So
That badly want that.
absolutely. So how has your experience been with Healthify Me, and how long have you been working? Please tell us or audience
So,
about that. Yeah.
yep, I've been with Healthify Me for about 6 months now. About 6 months now. So I was at a seed stage startup before, known as Procore. So I was designing for B2B interfaces before. Now I just transitioned into designing consumer facing apps, consumer centric apps. So dynamics are a lot different. So enjoying the stint here. So I'm currently sort of leading the design initiatives for the coach side experiences. So we have interfaces for the end customers as well as the coaches that manages the customer. So it's a very small and design team, but like we do great design. So I'm sort of leading the coach side experiences of things, designing interfaces for coach to manage their clients. So yeah,
Okay, great. So how big is the team at Healthify?
it's about 7 designers.
It's about
So
7 designers.
yeah, including UX researchers and one communication designer. So we're about 7 designers there.
About 7 designers. So,
Yep.
one question we get a lot of from our community members is like how are the roles divided between a team, right? So, how's the design team structured, especially in product companies?
So, see, I have been in companies where I sort of managed everything as a sole designer, and I moved on to being part of a team. So, at Healthify Me, since we are a very small team, so everyone sort of owns the part of the process. Like, it's not that you have visual designers or interaction designers who would be like finishing up your designs or giving it the visual layer or the interaction layer on top of it. So it's you who has to start from identification of the problem, conceptualizing it, validating it, till the point you ship it to engineers and doing the QA. So the entire spectrum is sort of taken care of by a single designer. But in companies where there are like multiple designers, there might be differentiation of role. Like there might be dedicated researchers, dedicated interaction designers. You might be the product designers only working on the conceptualization, validation, or the wireframing stage, and then you may be handing off to interaction designers who will just give the visual layer or maybe put in components from the design system. But in our context, we just, since it's a very small team, we have to own the entire end-to-end process.
Great to hear that. And how are you finding this role of leading a team of designers? Like you mentioned, you've been working as a
Uh,
sole designer in a company, and then moving to a team as well as leading a team. How does it that feel?
Yeah, so I am not leading a team. I'm leading the process of it. So I'm the only designer working there, but it's completely different. The dynamics are different. So I was working at a B2B sort of setup where maybe our client interaction was less, maybe where the problem space was more defined, or we knew what exactly should be made. But here in a B2C context, a lot of forces come into play, right? So we have to think about user psychology. We have to think about what users really want. There's like a lot of inflow of data as well that we can look into. So yeah, so the dynamics are a lot different. So enjoying this stint as well.
Great. So I think people are excited about responsive design and your conversation around it.
Yeah.
And so before we start off with your conversation, how do you think the world is transitioning in terms of the we have multiple devices around us, right? So it's not
Mhm.
just your mobile phone anymore or your desktop anymore. So in summary, how do you think the world is going to change with so many devices around it, and then the applications being present everywhere and in some
Yep.
form or the other? So what's your opinion about that?
So yeah, so it's now sort of imperative to think across your experience on multiple device, and even it has now expanded from just screen-based UIs to even no UI voice interfaces. So it's we are moving in that direction as well. So it's and like your design, you can't even control where your design would be viewed, right? It might be viewed at a maybe 56-inch screen, and then
Yeah.
it might come to a maybe a just a small smartphone or Android or maybe 5-6 inch smartphone. So you can't, and but you have to, at the end of the day, you have to provide that same experience maybe at the small smartphone to the largest of the screen where it might be viewed.
Yeah. So I think
So
technology is going to be omnipresent then, and
yeah, yeah.
and is indispensable in some form or the other.
Yep, and maybe in the future, like I know you guys are also doing it. It might not be restricted to screen. It might be just surrounding you. Yeah. So yeah.
Absolutely. All right, great. So we're looking forward to your conversations, and then I think a lot of people who've joined in here, they would be posting queries, and then we will take those questions after you have your conversation. All
Sure.
right.
Sounds good.
So,
So yeah,
so you can share your screen.
cool. I'm sharing my entire screen. Uh, cool. You can see my screen, right? Okay. Just this here. So hi everyone. I am Shreyan. I'm working as a product designer at Healthify Me. So, for those who you all don't know what Healthify Me is, Healthify Me is India's largest health and wellness app. We rank about two in. So before COVID, we were the number one in the health and wellness category, but now Arogya Setu and few COVID app has taken over us. But we are still at number three in App Store. We are about I think around rank two in Play Store. We have around 20 million users who are using our app on day-to-day basis. So we help users to manage their health, their weight goals, even not only health goals, even people who has lifestyle diseases like diabetes, PCOS, PCOD. We help them manage those as well through a platform, through giving them curated diet, exercises. And we have about 1,200 coaches who help these clients to maintain their diet, help them with their workouts and everything. So I'm currently leading the or designing for the coach side. I had a short stint with designing the consumer side experience as well, but I'm currently designing the coach side experience of things. So our coach side experience sort of runs on both desktop as well as smaller screens like tablets or phone as well. So we have to optimize for that as well, and we have to think, okay, maybe if my experience is on a desktop, if it's good, it should be easily usable when the coach or when the my user is using on a small device or a small screen resolution. Cool. So today's topic is about responsive design. So I'll be covering the fundamentals of it. We won't be going into too depths of it, but it would nudge you in direction where you can explore these in more detail. So why responsive design is important? Because you have to provide a great experience on all the different screens that users are on, right? So let's start with what is a responsive design. So you might think, okay, my user might be using the device on a laptop, right? Or maybe a desktop. But you never know, okay, what are the screen size of the user's laptop would be, or what's the resolution of a user's laptop would be. There are like so many laptops in the market. The user might use a screen resolution of or screen size of maybe 16 inch. Some people might be using 13 inch. Some people might be using a monitor of 27 inch, right? So you can't control that. But what you can control is sort of give them a great experience throughout all devices. Maybe if again you have designed for desktop. Maybe what if they open your app or maybe your web app on a small mobile phone, right? So you have to think of that experience as well, and sort of everything should feel also cohesive. Like it shouldn't feel like, okay, my desktop experience is one and it's completely a different experience on my phone, right? And if you do that, that might lead to a bad user experience for the your end users. So that is what responsive design is. So sort of making sure your interfaces look great on all the platforms, your interfaces look great or work as intended on all the platforms. So a core difference that we should understand is adaptive design versus responsive design. Okay, so what is the core difference in that? So if I show you this website, this is a landing page of maybe a software company. So if you see this website looks great, right? I have the content layout, everything looks proper. But what if I sort of minimize my window, resize my window, and I'm resizing my window, right? Still, it looks great. When I scroll, it's sort of looking great. Everything is it's sort of taking or responding to my change of my window size, right? Of my width of the browser window. If I go more, you see few elements are changing now. So first my nav bar was like this. I had a nav bar like this where I had product, solution, resources, pricing. But when I resize, it sort of changed to hamburger menu to accommodate for the space, right? If I go more in, the content also starts changing. If you see here, I had this, so my this part, the code part was towards my right? But when I start resizing it, it sort of went towards the down of it, the score. So this is basically responsive design. So the design on the web page is sort of responding to the browser width or the browser size. Okay. Now, what is adaptive design? So if you open Airbnb, right? If I open Airbnb, this looks great on my browser window. Maybe I can resize it a bit, and this is to a certain extent responsive. It is responsive, but say suppose you go here and go to inspect, change this to an iPhone. See, the entire experience sort of changed, right? When you refresh it, the entire experience sort of changed. So this is adaptive design. So what is doing the browser or the server is sort of rendering a web page or sending a web page that is adapted or that is perfect for that device size from which is coming. A good example is if you open google.com. So Google looks like this on a desktop, right? But if you try resizing the window, it resizes to certain extent. It's resizing. It's sort of resizing, right? But if you try to open google.com from your phone, now this Google is completely different, right? To the one that you see here. So what Google is doing, Google is checking, okay, my request is coming from which device? Maybe it's coming from a phone, or I can change it to maybe an Android. Still, it's sort of rendering the phone sort of design, right? The design that's adapted for the phone. So this is known as an adaptive design, where the server or it's programmed in a certain way that it will render the version of the web page or version of the web app that's appropriate for your device. So when adaptive, when responsive, there's not a clear answer to it. It depends on your use cases. But if you're, say, suppose designing a web apps or functionality heavy web pages, then it's better to use adaptive designs. But if you're designing maybe landing pages or websites that don't have that much functionality, or maybe you can get do with a responsive design, then you should be using a responsive design. So what adaptive design gives you, it gives you more control on what, on exactly how you want to render your web pages. Okay, so cool. Yep. So what we'll be covering today is mainly artboard sizes while you're designing, what is breakpoints, what are viewports, what are grids, and what are relative CSS units or CSS units. Okay. So, yep. So one of the major question, or one of the most asked question that I get from designers who are just starting out, or maybe if you are new into UI, you are designing web pages, the common question, or the most asked question that I get, okay, what should be the artboard size that I should take to design a website, right? So it's sort of, there's no one artboard size that you can take to design the website. So we'll be looking at few fundamentals or basics of how you don't actually need a particular artboard to design a website. Okay. So there's like no fixed rule. Okay, you have to use this artboard size for a website. You have to use that artboard size for a website. There's sort of, uh, how do I put it? A sort of rule or a way you can use a artboard that sort of fits all your devices. Okay. One thing that we have to understand before that is where are your users are. So on which device your users would be using your websites, right? So most and forget resolution. The most important thing here is the aspect ratio of that device. Okay. So currently in today's scenario, the most common aspect ratios that you'll find, I'm not saying there are not any other aspect ratios other than this, but the most common aspect ratio that you'll find is 16:9 and 16:10. Most common are 16:9. Okay. So what you have to understand is, okay, where exactly your customers or your users would be using your app or website, right? So if they are using on an older generation HD panel, they would be on 1280 and 2720. If they're on maybe normal Windows laptop, it's high chances they are using 136s and 768. If they're on new laptops, they would be using a full HD display, that's 1920. If they're on Macs, most Macs have, like the 13-inch Macs would have 1400 into 9, 1440 into 900, and the new generation Macs would have 25. With the this is basically the Retina resolution is 2560 into 1600. So, but now you might ask, okay, do then I'm again confused. Okay, which artboard site should I use, right? So we will come into concept that it's not necessary that you have to use any one of these. We would understand concepts, the concept of responsive design, how you can design for one artboard size, and that would sort of fulfill all the use cases for these different artboard sizes. Okay. So before we start, let's understand about breakpoints. What is breakpoints? So again, if I come to this website, so maybe I am viewing it at a widescreen sort of setup, right? My entire browser is at full width, and I'm viewing the website at this sort of browser width. But when I try to resize my browser window, I'm trying to shrink it, shrink it, shrink it, shrink it, shrink it, shrink it. I'm shrinking it more. And here, around somewhere around this point, can you see my sort of all these things, all the layouts changes a bit. My images, the image was like this, but when I just came to this width, my image changed. The image sort of became small. My nav bar changed to a hamburger menu. Few content got pushed. So this was towards the right, it came down. So this is one breakpoint. What do I mean by breakpoint? A resolution or a width where sort of my content changes or my layout changes a bit. Okay. So this is one breakpoint that we have found. Let's shrink this even more. Shrinking it, shrinking it, shrinking it. This is not a breakpoint. This line just broke into. And yeah, this is another one. So if I come here, see the content changed significantly. And this is probably the breakpoint you would have for your phone. So they have three breakpoints, three places where the sort of the layout of the website changes based on the web. This is one, this is two, and this is three. Okay. So if you want to see it, like compare it with how what devices this breakpoint would be in. So maybe this is a phone view when you maybe open the website on a phone. This is a tablet view, maybe when you're opening the website on a tablet, or maybe in some cases when you're opening the website in phone in a horizontal or a landscape mode. And when you expand it, this is the case where you'll be opening the website on a desktop. Okay. Let's check another website. Let's check Slack. So this is my full width, maybe my desktop view. Now when I resize this window, I resize it. This is my one breakpoint. My navigation bar sort of changed to a hamburger menu. I'm resizing it even more. It sort of changed into a phone layout. So there was the image like this, and the image sort of changed indifferently, and there's this button that also appears. Yep. So this also has three breakpoints. Okay. And this would be the view maybe if you open slack.com from your phone. So basically, what are breakpoints? Breakpoints are sort of the width of the screen, and as we reduce the width of the screen, the points where the sort of the layout breaks, and we change the layout into a different layout. Okay. So we can categorize the breakpoints majorly into three sort of categories. One is the small viewports that are phones. One is the medium viewports that are till tablets or horizontal landscape mode phone views. And third is large viewports that is for uh, desktop as well as big monitors, something like that. Also, you can see an iPad is sort of in between the large and the medium, because when I just put the iPad on a landscape mode, it sort of takes my width similar to a desktop. Okay. So, yep. So, if you heard of Bootstrap, Bootstrap is basically a CSS framework for web development. So, Bootstrap has inbuilt sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 breakpoints. Okay. So extra large is for displays. So they have given the dimensions of the resolution as well, like where exactly, if you shrink the browser windows width, where exactly my browser would break, those dimensions that they have given. So what they have given is for, and based on these breakpoint, based on this, what the breakpoint is, they would change the properties of grids or maybe the type sizes or the layout, they would change according to that. So for dimensions of for browser width that are greater than 1400, so what Bootstrap says, okay, you would be on the breakpoint of extra large. So and from 1200 to 1400, maybe if you are at 1399 pixels, you would be at extra large. Okay, then the grid would also define. Now from 992 to 1200 to 1199. From 992 to 1199, you would be at extra large breakpoints. And similarly, anything that exceeding comes between this range to 768 to 992, it would be under medium. For 562, it would be under small. So according these breakpoints, you have to create your layouts according to that. So you'll have maybe small, medium, large, extra large. And so, but in current scenario, we don't have sort of all those layouts. We design generally for max 3 to 4 breakpoints. So if you see this graph CMS website, so it's made for just 3 breakpoints. And it's enough if you just design for 3 breakpoints: one for large browser window, one for tablets and this sort of browser size, and one is small. And this is sort of a reference that you can take, and sort of the screen resolutions that are out there. So a 480 width for smaller smartphones, 480 to 768 for larger smartphones, 768 to 1279 for normal tablets in landscape mode, as well as laptops or small laptops, whatever. And for 1280 plus, it should be larger desktop and monitors. Okay, cool. Uh, yep. And so, what we have covered till now is about the width of the device, right? The horizontal distance. Now, what about, so again, your devices, the your interface or your website might be used at different devices. That different device might have different resolution, different width. Your devices might have different heights as well, right? So a phone might uh, some phone might have some height, another phone might have the screen as bigger height. Okay, so now, what is a viewport in term of web design or in context of web design? A viewport represents the area in computer graphics being currently viewed. In web browser's term, it is generally the same as web browser window, excluding the UI, menu bar, etc. that is part of the document you are viewing. Okay. So, if let me check if I'm sharing my entire screen. Yeah, I'm sharing my entire screen. So, just a second, I closed my window by mistake. So what is a viewport? Viewport is basically the part of my document or part of my HTML website that I am viewing at a web browser. Okay. So if you see this web browser, my this part, right? My where the tabs are, maybe where the search bar is, this is not my part of the viewport. The black area that you see all around, this is part of my viewport. This is my viewport. So my height won't be, if I ask what is the viewport of your laptop, of your, so first there's no viewport of a laptop, or there's no viewport of a device. There's viewport of a browser, right? Because different browser might have different viewport. If I just open Safari, right? If I just open Safari, Safari's viewport would be very different from Chrome's viewport. I have this width might be different, or if even if I go full screen, this width might be different from what I have in Chrome. Okay, so that is a viewport. So whenever you're going in for mobile, or whenever you are using the browser in mobile, you might have the status bar at the top, the UI of the uh, browser there at the bottom. Then you might have your navigation control at the bottom, the back, all these buttons. So, and the remaining space that's saved, that's the viewport. Okay. So why viewport is important? Because whenever you're opening a website, right? So maybe whenever I'm opening my website, I see this content, right? This content out here. This content, or the content that I see without scrolling, without even a single scroll on maybe your laptop or maybe your phone, that is known as my first fold content. So whenever you're designing, you have to make sure that your important content, that maybe this one, right, boost your conversions, boost your website, this comes in first fold irrespective of the device you're on. So how you can do it, there's a unit known as VH, that is viewport height. So if you are designing websites where you need your first fold content or your content of the website, whenever someone opens, the major content should sort of take the entire area of the space that's available, irrespective of the device they're using on. Space that's available, and your content should fill the entire, right? So you might want to use a unit known as VH to define the height of it. And you can't use it in design. You have to specify it to your engineers who are designing it, who are developing it. That, hey, I want this to cover my entire viewport height. So just make sure you have the unit as 100%, 100 VH. That is 100% of the viewport. But if a scenario comes, okay, maybe your content might be 50% of your viewport, it would just take 50% height of the what's visible in the first fold. Maybe I want to show something till this part, right? So it's my 50% of my viewport height. So you might tell, okay, define it as 50% of 50 VH, that it will just cover 50% of my viewport height. Okay, and these are something that you have to show in designs. You have to create multiple iterations based on the viewport height, and then you have to convey it to the engineers that, okay, while you're building it, make sure it's like that. Okay, and those things you have to be mindful about while that's being developed. Now let's come to an interesting concept, and probably the most sort of misunderstood or sort of not got or concept, that's grid. So what grid would help you? Grid would help you answer this question: what should be the artboard size? Okay. And so let's sort of understand what exactly is grids. So grids are nothing but sort of a set of vertical columns or vertical lines, that invisible lines. So whenever you open a website, you won't see grids like as red, and things aligned according to that. They're invisible lines, but what it does, it helps you to align objects or align elements in the in the horizontal order, so that your design looks professional, your design looks equally spaced out. Okay. So there are three properties of grid that you have to keep in mind. One is the column width, one is the gutter, and one is the margin. We will come into that, each of these in details. Okay. Also, there's a concept of, so okay, let's come to, so let's understand there are two types of grids. One is fixed grids and one is fluid grid. Okay. So I won't spend too much time here. I would like to show you exactly on Figma how grids are set up. Okay. And we'll understand the concept of gutter, column width, and margins here. So say suppose this is my website screen. I have just taken, I just want to maybe design for desktop. So I have taken maybe for large monitor. So I've taken any artboard size that's more than 1280. I could have taken anything, maybe anything that's more than 1280. So I have taken 1440. Okay. So in Figma, I'm just using Figma. There's this option on all the design tools, on XD, on Sketch, whatever you're using, this option would be there. So I click on Figma here. I click on layout grid. Then I change this to column. Okay. Now I see a lot of options here, right? So what I would do is I would set this to center, and I have something known as width. Okay. So what width basically here in Figma is the column width that we were talking about. Column width. What basically the column width is nothing but the width of my each column. This one. If I measure this by bringing a rectangle, this is 24. The width of this is 24, right? So the width of my each column is 24. Okay. And then another property there was, that's gutter. Gutter is basically the space between two columns. So this space that you see right here between two grid lines is 60. This space is known as the gutter width. Okay. And another concept is the margin. Now, if I'm coming, why I'm doing this to stretch, why I'm doing this to center, I'll explain it to why. Another concept is margin. Margin is basically the space from the sides of the screen. This space. From where my screen starts to from where my grid starts, this space between the screen start and my grid start is known as the margin. So this is 72. And this side is also 72. Okay. So this is my margin. So just to recap, this is my column width. This is my column width. This is my gutter width. And this is my margin. Okay. Now let's come to the concept of, so this is how you define the grid. Okay. Now let's come to the concept of fixed grid, fluid grid, and fixed grid. Okay. So what's fluid grid? The box with containers on your website will scale gradually between each breakpoint. So it would scale. So as you sort of stretch the website window or the browser window, your grid would also sort of stretch and sort of resize on with respect to the browser window. So that is known as a fluid grid. This setting is useful for smaller breakpoints where there's many different device width and you want your website to use all the available space. So say suppose when you're designing in mobile, your website is you are designing your websites for mobile. So you don't want, maybe if I'm using my devices a bit broader, it has more width, right? I want that content to fill up my entire width because it's a small device, right? But when fixed grid is sort of used is when you're designing for larger screen size. So say suppose you're designing for desktop, right? My website can be used on a 16-inch monitor. My website can be also used on a 52-inch maybe LED or LCD TV, right? But I don't want my content to span the entire width of the TV. Then like I might be over, like I might get confused reading the entire width of the text, right? So there, what I want, my grid should be fixed. Maybe at certain extent, it should not extend or it should not go beyond that. So you might have seen few websites that, however big you might stretch it, it's sort of the contents sat at the center, and it doesn't sort of expands with respect to the size of the monitor, right? Cool. So now we will see how we can use fixed grids, and like also there's a concept of maps with, and we'll see how we can use those in Figma. Cool. So let's take and I'm just taking just few arbitrary values here just to showcase. Also, while defining the grid, it's upon you, either you use a Bootstrap grid system, I'll come to that as well, how you can use it, or else you have to define it with your engineers or based on your content what kind of grid system you want, what's the gutter width or what's the margin width, what you want. Okay, but for now I'm just taking arbitrary values. So yep. uh, uh, I'm going to stretch. I set a margin to maybe 72. Okay. Also, why it's generally or the most used type of grid system is a 12 column grid. So generally, I would suggest you, while you're designing normal websites or landing pages, use a 12 column grids, and that's the probably the most popularly used. Why? Because 12 is you can have a 4 column layout, and as well as you can have a 6 column layout. That's why it's better to use a 12 column grid. So that gives you flexibility on how you want to lay out your stuff. Maybe at some point you want to use 4 column, at some point you can use 3 column, and the flexibility is upon you. Okay. So now, one concept that we understand here is max width. Okay. We'll come to that. What's that? So for this, right? For this, I have set my grids to 12 column grid, stretch and margin is 72 and gutter width is 20. Now see, if you see the width, right, the width has changed to auto. Why? Because my grid would be stretching itself, keeping the margins fixed and the gutter width fixed. So these two things you can fix while in a uh, fluid grid scenario, right? So I can fix my margin and I can fix my padding, my gutter width. Now, say suppose it's on 1400 into 1024, whatever. I change this. And now maybe same website, I am viewing it on a 1920 monitor. Now see what happens. So if you see here, my this area, right? This is 72. This is 72. And this entire width has changed to 1776, whereas here it was 1296. And each of the grid column width, right? Each of the column width has also changed. So here it was 90, here it is 129. Okay, so this is how fluid grids work. So, and this is good. Say suppose you're in a small screen, you don't want your contents to be just at the center, right? If it's small screen, you have space, you want it to expand the entire width. So say suppose let's take a small screen here. Let's take a phone and let's add a 2-column grid. Column 2, margin is 16, gutter is maybe 16. So maybe it's this size. I expand it. How much more? This is the max it can expand, or even more. So I want my content. Okay, my contain. So this is my container width. This is where my all the contents would reside, right, within this. So I want that space to fill up in my, if it extends a bit, I want, okay, fill up my this space. But maybe in a desktop scenario, my designs might not look well. Why? A good example is, say suppose your texts are here, right? Your texts are here. This is a maybe a text paragraph or something. It's okay in 1440, it's easily legible for you. You can just scroll your eyes and read it. Maybe at a 1920 scenario, it's also legible, but it's not that easy. But then again, your website is being viewed maybe at a 4K display. That's 3048 in width. Maybe at 3048 width. Then it's tough for the readers to, like, you don't want your readers to read a paragraph that's so long. The user's eyes would get tired, right? Just scrolling through the entire width of the screen. In that context, we might use fixed grid. Okay, so what fixed grid do is, if I bring this only here in Figma, how we can implement a fixed grid, I change the type to center. So also notice here my width is auto, right? I can't change the width, but when I change it to center, I can define a width. Okay, I maybe 90 pixels I define, and gutter width is 20. Now, but I don't have an option to define the margins. The margins would be automatically set. How? Say suppose I now view it on 1920. See, my margins, these two sides are a lot more than here when I was visualizing on 1400, right? Now maybe I take this to a 3048 display. Again, my things are all centered, and my content, my container width is only this much. All the till the bounding box of the red lines, right? But this also might not suffice all your use cases, right? So your designs might not look good at a large screen monitor, right? So everything is centered and you might not like it, right? So, and even in large screen monitor, this is still okay, but maybe in 1920, like there's a lot of spaces that you're wasting on these two sides, right? Then what a concept that comes in handy is known as max width. What is max width? What max width does? So it's basically a CSS property. So what max width defines is, if you have certain elements or a container box, it would stretch till certain extent. You can specify the max value of it, and beyond that it won't stretch, it would become fixed. So what max width gives you the superpower to sort of make your grid fluid as well as fixed. Okay, so let's understand how. So first, max width, what it does, first in max width scenario, first your grids are fluid, and beyond specific width, it becomes fixed. Let's move it here. Let's understand how we can do it. So let's take this frame only. So in this frame, this is my container width, the gray part where all my contents would be visible. This is my margin. Maybe let's change the color to green. Yep, this is my margin. Okay, so this is 72 and this is 1296. Okay, now I set my max width to 1920 pixels. Now let's see how things would behave in this context. Okay, now maybe I come here, I expand my window, and maybe in some monitor, or and say suppose some monitor has this resolution 728. Cool. It's lesser than my max width. Cool. The grid sort of resizes itself. Okay, now I design for 1920. Okay, cool. That's way below my specified max width, and in a full HD display, 1920 display takes up 1776. Okay, so the max width property applies on the container width. So it's checking how much width of this container is, this one. Okay, and we have set it to, or we have told the browser, okay, how big your browser might be, but my container width shouldn't exceed 1920. Okay, so in 1920 window or 1920 width, it's 776. Okay, now if I expand this to 3480, right, this grid would expand because this is like in Figma you can't control it, but I would say this is 3048. So 48. Okay. This grid has expanded, but it won't behave in a browser context. Since Figma can't control it, so it has expanded. So what we'll do, while designing website, we have to be mindful about designing for these use cases also. We'll tell it to developer, okay, set the constraint to 1920. So how exactly will it show up in 1920 display? Your grid area, right? Your grid width, or this would will not expand 1920. So your content area would be 1920. It would be centered, and then we would just bring the margins up, just to fix it here. Yep, it's fixed now, and this would be my paddings on both sides. Now see, this would exactly how a browser would render your grids when you have max width set to 1920. Okay, so this container width, where all your contents would lie, that would not exceed 1920. Okay, even if you might go more wide monitor, it can be 5000, 6000, but your content would be centered, would be at a place that's taking a width of max of 1920. Okay, and this is how you have to design. So maybe if you have use cases where your device might be, or your designs might be viewed at 13048, you have to create an iteration for it. Won't be much different from it. Maybe these contents would only fit in here, only it would stretch a bit, but you have to do one iteration for this. One thing that comes in very handy in Figma is the concept of constraints. So I'm not going into much depth of it, But what constraints can do, constraint would help you to create these iterations faster. Say suppose I have some random layout like this. Let me give it some fill. I have some random layouts like this. So, so if I set my constraints properly, and if I bring this and if I resize, now if I resize it, see my internal contents are also resizing as per of the constraints I've set. Okay, so that's a concept that you can look up on YouTube or something, but that would help you create iterations for your designs faster, because you might have to check at different breakpoints or at different viewports how will your designs look. So that's one concept in Figma. That's one power and feature in Figma that will come in very handy. But again, so this is one concept that we have to keep in mind, that is max width while designing for responsive screens. Okay, so I have shown you the desktop context. The same applies for mobile as well. Cool. Yeah. Now, interesting thing for responsive design is the designing in percentages, or this is not a design thing that you can control, but this is basically the developer thing, or maybe you can help the developer design it. Okay, so what I say percent is, if say suppose in this screen, right, I define something of width 100%, that means it would take 100% of the container width. Okay, and if I apply constraints properly here, and if my browser resizes again, if my browser resizes again, so if I have property 100% to any element, that element would take up 100% space of my container width. Okay, and if it's suppose some contents is 50%, it would take up 50% of my container width. Okay, and this are relative units. Sort of it depends on the size of the browser or the size of the width. So you don't have to necessarily mention the width of this is this pixels while you're coding, because you can't help or you can't design in responsive units in Figma. But you can tell my developer, okay, this would span 100% of the width. Okay, so that's one concept. Like that's a sort of a concept in CSS where you can define units in percentage, and that's a fundamental of responsive design. So you have to tell the engineers that, okay, maybe this is a element or this is a div that you might want to give it 100% width. So irrespective of the width, it would just cover the 100% of my entire container width. Okay. Now, these two units are helpful. EM and REMs would be helpful while designing or responsive design to define font sizes. Okay, how it works is, let's first understand what is EMs. Okay, so what EM is basically, so in responsive design, right? So while you're designing for multiple breakpoints, you would have to design multiple iterations from it. So one for desktop, you'll be then designing one for maybe tablets, one for tablet, then you might design one for phone, right? So the heading that you have used on desktop, that same heading you can't use for tablet, right? It would be too large of a heading. And similarly, that same heading you can't even use for mobile. That would be too large for mobile's context, right? So what you can do is take help of REMs or EMs, So what you have to define is for an element, and there's a property in CSS known as media query. So based on the breakpoints, based on the size of the screen, it would select which property you want to add here. And maybe this is something that you can speak with the developers. They would help you understand all these. So I have defined, so what EM does is EM works on the element level. Okay. So I have mentioned P for P, my font size at 60 pixels. Okay. And I have given line height of 2 EMs. Okay. So for these paragraph, so I've taken this paragraph and then this CSS styling these paragraphs. For these paragraphs, my line height is 2 EMs. That is 2 times my font size of that element. Okay. So it's 16 pixels here. Now, if say suppose I was on desktop, right, and my font size for paragraph is maybe 32 pixels, right? So and at that point I might need a bit more line height, right, or maybe some font size I might need it more. So for that, I would define the EM as 2 times my font size of that element. Okay, so maybe whenever I'm on desktop, if it's 32, my line height will be 64 because it's twice the height of the text. And whenever maybe I have changed my breakpoint and my CSS told, okay, for this element, your font size will be 16 pixels. Then my line height will be same, twice of the font size that it would directly calculate at 16 pixels. So you won't have to write the code for every breakpoint again and again and again. So EM will take care of that. Also, in this example, we are having a 30 pixel of font size for this div, right? And for the span, we wanted to maybe the half of this div. Span is basically an element within a line. It's not a div, but it's a sort of a part of that div only. So for span, we wanted to be 15 pixels. And it's how we have defined for span, the font size will be 0.5 of EM, right? So it's 30 pixels. Now it's 0.5 of 30, that is 15 pixels. Maybe if I change this to 60, right? If I change this to 60, this would become my 30. This span would become 30 pixels. If I run it, see, this 60 and this will become 30. And this would help you in responsive design. How? Using media query, you would define font size of each of these, right? And when you shrink window, keep shrinking window, that would, you don't have to write code for each of the breakpoint again and again. Just with EM, the browser would take care of it and it would sort of shrink and define the line heights, the font size, everything using taking the relative values of it. Another thing is REMs. What REMs is, so EM take the value of the element, font size of the element. What REM takes is the value of the root, that is the HTML. Or for, and few browsers, if you don't define it explicitly, few browsers have default REM, default values for this. Okay, so for this, I know my browser size is 16, or I've defined it 16, and my heading, then I can define my heading would be maybe 3 REMs. So it takes 3 into 16 and it defines this, twice the browser font size. Okay, so if you just inspect this, if you just inspect it, it's okay. So it's okay. The top div is 32, and this so this is 48, thrice the REM, and this is 32, like twice of 16 pixel. Okay, so these are few relative unions of CSS union that you can make use of. So why we introduced you to these is basically if you are using any design sort of no-code tools like Webflow or something, then these all would come in handy. So you would know the concept of this, but sadly you can't use these concepts in Figma or in any design software. In any design software, you have to design it in pixels, then sort of communicate, or maybe if you want to, okay, this is 16 pixel here, my heading is 32, and then you make your body 16, and then you can communicate that to your developer, that that is how I sort of designed it. Or maybe sit with your developer and understand the concept and design accordingly. Okay. So yep, and there are two more CSS units, that is viewport height and viewport width. So one thing that I told you earlier, that something at some point you might want to have this viewport height, or you might want to something to cover the entire viewport, right? So then you might use 100 VH as unit, not just specifying these sort of area in pixels, because you might not never know like in which browser if you have some CTAs or buttons and it's not in the viewport, that might sort of get it might not be in the first fold, and you want your CTAs or text to be in the first fold, right? So you might want to include VH and define, okay, that div or that container area would be my 100 VH, and that would take up my entire first fold of the viewport. So, and viewport width is basically the width that's available to you. And basically this is not a, basically we generally use percentages for width, but this is also one unit that you can use, a relative unit that you can use for defining the width or designing content according to the width of the viewport available. Okay. And yeah, I think that was it for today. I know I just barely scratched the surfaces of it, but if you have any questions, if you have any doubt, you can connect me or you can hit me up on Twitter. My user ID is Ghosh. You can just send me you can just follow me there, and my DMs are open. If you have any questions or doubts, you can DM me there, and I would be more than happy to answer you that. So cool. Yep, this was it for today, and now I'm happy to take few questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Shreyan. It was a good session.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think there are a few questions that people have asked. Let's just take them one by one. People can still ask questions in the chat. There's one question that says, I think this is also one common question that comes again and again, right? So, how do you plan that? How should you decide that you should go mobile first or desktop first when you are planning for your responsive? Uh, there's one question that I think people have asked.
Okay. So, uh, one thing is you have to understand where your audience are. So, where exactly your audience would be using your app or any website that you're making. If your audience are on mobile, so then we should go mobile first. We should perfect the experience on mobile and then sort of expand it to a desktop first setup. Like a lot of websites like Udan, Misho, I think they are in a mobile first setup. So if
Yeah.
you just open their desktop, it's sort of a shrinked version or a sort of a fixed with version of what's shown on mobile. But if you see that your users are desktop first, maybe some websites of development tools or maybe the website that I showed you, right? You know, people would open that from desktop. So first perfect the desktop experience, then sort of go into perfecting mobile experience. But again, like it so you don't have to neglect any one of these. You have to see it looks great on both, because you never know from where your customers might open your website or open your app. But first understand where exactly your customers are, where exactly they would be opening for. Yeah. But also a sort of a side note is, in Indian consumer context, most of the Indian users, a lot of Indian users are mobile first, basically the consumer segment of users. So it's better if you perfect the mobile experience first and then move it on to a desktop experience.
Okay, great. So basically, talking about like look at your audience again. It's all about
Yep.
persona. So
Yep.
where are they lying? What kind of devices they're using, and the majority audience where which devices they are using, you should adapt to that or focus on that device first.
Exactly.
That would be easy for everyone to understand, I think.
Yeah.
There's another question here. I think is scalable design and responsive design the same?
Mm,
I'm not very.
I don't. What do you mean by scalable design?
I think Ankit is asking. Ankit, you would want to detail that out. What was the question? I think it's more about the scalability of the design as your design expands. How do you manage the responsive side of it, right? Because you would be designing for multiple breakpoints, right? So as
Mm-hmm.
your design scales up, so you have now n number of screens to cater to.
Uh, yeah, that is. I think that is a part of responsive design. But again, scalable design could be something that I'm not sure if it's maybe a lot of users are coming in if it's sort of fit for a larger set of audience and how it scales to a larger set of audience. So that might be a scalable design. I'm
Okay.
not sure what it means.
Okay, Ankit, you need to, I think, expand on this. Then there's another question here. If I make my website responsive, how do I cater to multiple browsers, basically?
It's basically the concepts of the basic thing, the grids, the layouts that I told you, right? If I make yeah, it would obviously open on older browser. Older browsers do support content, do support grid, but you have to be mindful about things and that's if you're concerned, you have to see what all, like, I think concepts like flexbox and all these things are not supported by a lot of older browsers, but I think grids are responsive units are, so yep. But again, there's like charts that you can see on w3 css or whatever to see, but I think flexbox is the only responsive design concept that's not sort of available on older browser, but I think grids or these scalable relative units are good.
Yeah, I think the compatibility is also an issue which is handled by the engineering side.
Yep.
And we would rather would want to see the browser's compatibility in terms of responsiveness, that all what are the sizes and the viewports, and then how do we design for that. But
Yes.
in older browsers, and the support of that would be a task for the engineers.
More of the engineer side. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah. All right, so I think another question, PX or REM, which unit is better?
Uh, I personally prefer pixels because I would be designing for multiple viewports. And pixels with percentage for widths, but for vertical rhythm, I would say go for pixels and go for multiple breakpoints, because if you have REMs and you still your browser shrinks, there will be a lot of noise that would be happening or a lot of changes that would be happening that might not be good. So define your width, keep your width on percentages or any responsive relative units, and for vertical spacing and for the vertical rhythms, keep it 2 pixels.
I think these are the questions that is from the audience. One question, another one that I have here is, so how do you manage the workflow whenever you are designing for responsive, right? What is a typical workflow for designers when they are planning? Like, how do you set up your canvases? How do you structure your assets? And how do you plan
Yep.
for multiple breakpoints?
So let me give you how I do it, and it might vary from designer to designer. First is the thing that's imperative to understand where your audience are. There, your product managers or maybe you go and research, understand where exactly the users will be using the device. Then to defining the grid part or maybe how I will structure the layout, bring in your engineers a bit. Or if you're designing just normal landing pages, it's better if you can stick to Bootstrap grid or something and use that. And with the engineers, define the grids. Tell them, okay, this is the layout I'm planning. They might also help you, like, okay, these are the screen size I have, design it, understand these concepts that I have showed you. You can revisit those, but make sure you annotate each of these states. So if my width is spanning, what my max width would be. If if a button is spanning 100% at a breakpoint and it's spanning 50% at a different breakpoint, annotate that, engineers. But make sure when you're handing off your designs, don't leave any question unanswered for them, and don't leave any space for assumptions for the engineers. Make sure that you have everything specced out. What are the grid would be, either it's a fluid grid, till what extent it's fluid, what's the max width of the grid would be. Answer everything, involve the engineers in all this stuff of the person who is developing it, and yeah, that's basically the process.
I think that's it, Shreyan. I think let's not push it further for everyone. Let's keep it short. And but
Cool.
also, how is your experience? How has your experience been with the designers as a mentor?
It's great. Like it really amazes me, like how people are enthusiastic about it. Uh, like I have mentored people from so many varied backgrounds. So I have mentored, and they are younger to me. Few are very elderly to me. I had one person who was a physician, is not even in India. She wanted to transition into design. So yeah, people are understanding the importance of design. They want to explore it. They are curious and sort of interacting with them, meeting them, networking with them. It's a great experience.
Yeah. So it's very interesting to see people from different fields coming into a more like looking for a transition to a more creative field.
Yeah, yeah,
So we have CAs, we have HRs, we have
exactly.
physicians coming into design, and then we just wonder what's gonna happen in future. I think everyone's just gonna be more and more interested in this field.
Yep, I think what I am very hopeful about is technology would be accessible to a lot of people. So designers coming in, they would understand users, not just engineers building stuff based on the assumptions, but people really understanding what exactly. And yeah, like I'm very hopeful about we'll see some great products, and would love to see design founders building great products. So yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
All right, Shayan. Thank you so much, Santi. Thank you for joining in,
cool.
and thank you.
It was great. One thing that I forgot to mention. Let me just quickly share my screen for everyone. So, if you need a Bootstrap grid, what you can do, you can go to Figma. You can go to Figma. You can go to Community. You can search here for Bootstrap. Click this. Go to Duplicate, and have your grid set up for all the breakpoints that we talked about, and you will have your grids pre-set up. So you can just take these and design contents on top of it. So yep, you can use this like completely out of the box. You don't have to set up the grid again and again. So this is something that you can make use of.
Okay, okay, great. So we can put this link for people to use and maybe in the description below.
Yep. Also, maybe I can share you a few resource links that you can maybe, if someone else is watching the video at a later time, they can maybe find it in the description as well.
All right, great. Thank you, Shreyan. Thank you for your
Thanks,
time.
Atul.
Thank you for
It
joining.
it
We'll have
was
some
great
more.
interacting with you.
Absolutely, same here as well. All right, bye bye.
Bye.
um, we're gonna close on these note, and we're gonna have bring in more uh, people on Detox. So stay tuned in. If you have any questions, you can still bring in and put it in the chat box. We will take them later on. If you want to see someone and you want to bring them to this platform, we will try to call them. If there are some topics that you would want to discuss, we will try to cater to those as well. So drop in your comments, and then see you then for the next time. Thank you so much. Bye bye.